Hi, kiddo. What is your name? Well, what if you were taken captive and carted off to a foreign land and called by a strange name? That happened to these four friends you'll meet in this story.
Hi, kiddo. I'm Grandma Goodie, and I'm here to tell you a Bible story. And this here's Oliver. She's our kitty cat. I don't know where Bo is, but she's graced us with her presence. She thinks she's royalty, which that's good because we have a story about a king today. Now, this story, I'm going to introduce you to some characters, and I'm going to tell you several stories about their lives, and it gets more and more exciting as it goes along. So just get to know these characters, and then you're going to see some exciting stuff that happens, some of the best stories in the whole Bible, if you ask Grandma Goodie. Now, this story, it takes place a long, long time ago in the land of Israel when the king of Israel was named Jehoiakim. And the people of Israel had been warned by God many times that they should obey him, but they kept disobeying him. And so God warned them by prophets and said, if you keep that up, I'm going to send someone to take you off and teach you a lesson. And so King Nebuchadnezzar of the land of Babylonia, he came to Israel and he surrounded the city of Jerusalem where the temple of God was and where the king lived. And God let him come in and fight against them, and he was able to go into the temple of God, and it says that God let him take some of the treasures there, and because he won the war against them, he took some of the people of the royal family of the tribe of Judah, and he tied them up, and he took them away as captives, and he made them march all the way to Babylon. Among these young men, there were four young men that you're going to get to know. There was a Daniel and a Hananiah and Azariah and a Mishael, and they were fine young men. King Nebuchadnezzar, he told his chief of staff, now I want you to pick out the best of these young men. I want the smartest and the brightest and the finest. And I want them to be trained up so they could work in the royal palace of Babylon and work for me. And so they picked out Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael. But you know what? They didn't want them to keep their Hebrew names. They didn't want them to keep their own language. They wanted to change them. So he gave them all new names. And so Daniel, he called Belshazzar, or Belshazzar, I can't say it very good. And Hananiah, he named him, oh gosh, I can't remember. But one of them was Shadrach, and there was a Meshach, and there was an Abed-nego. But anyway, they gave them those Babylonian names, and I think those were for baloney, but anyway. And then they said, we're going to send you to a special school. So they said, we're going to teach you the language of Babylon, and you're going to learn all the stories and all the literature. And they wanted to treat them, they wanted to fatten them up and make them strong and healthy. And so they said, you're going to get to eat in the king's cafeteria, and you get to have all the good food and the wine that the king feeds all of the people who get to feast with him. Now that was a problem because God commanded the Hebrew people to not eat certain things. They had to eat a very careful diet. These four young men, they were actually among the few who were obeying God very carefully. And so Daniel determined in his heart he was not going to eat anything that would break the rules of what God told him to eat. So he went to the chief of staff of the king and he said, "Psst, we can't eat that stuff." And so he had respect and he had affection for Daniel too. And he said, now Daniel, I'd really like to let you eat whatever you like, but I'm afraid that the king would cut my head off. And if you don't eat the good food, you might not look as good as the other fellas. And he'd ask why. And if he found out that I just let you eat other stuff, and so Daniel, he talked to the man who was working for the chief of staff, and he said, hey, how about we try a test? For 10 days, just let me and my friends eat only vegetables and drink only water, because that way they knew that they wouldn't violate God's law. And after 10 days, compare how we look to how the other fellas look and see who looks the best. And so he thought that sounded like an okay idea. So they ate only vegetables and water, and at the end of 10 days, they were the best looking fellas in the whole group. And so they got permission for them to keep eating the food that wouldn't violate God's laws. And so for 3 years, they studied, and God gave them ability and special smarts that they could learn better than any of the other fellas. And they learned a new language of the Babylonians and all their stories. And God even gave Daniel a special ability. He could interpret dreams and visions. So at the end of the 3 years, they had to go and talk to the king, and he would see if they were smart enough and if they spoke the language well enough and knew the stories well enough. Well, he examined all the young men, and the king himself said, Daniel, or Belshazzar and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abed-nego, that's what he called them. He said that they were smarter than anybody. Later on, he said that their wisdom and their good judgment was 10 times as smart as anybody else. And so Daniel and his friends all stayed there, and they worked in the palace as servants to that king. Let me show you where to find that in your own Bible. It's in the Old Testament, and the book is called Daniel, and the chapter is chapter 1, and the verses are from verse 1 all the way through verse 20. And if you're using the secret code, oops, there goes the kitty. She doesn't stay long. If you're using the secret code, it's DAN 1 and the 2 dots 1 through 20. And you remember, kiddo, Grandma Goodie loves you, but God loves you more.